We don't yet know who will have the best car in F1 2026, but we do know the quality of the drivers each team has. So regardless of car performance, who has the best driver lineup on the grid? Including where they ranked versus last year, here's our list, kicking off with the weakest duo of the 11 teams. 11th, Racing Bulls. Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad down 1. On his best weekends in 2025, Liam Lawson was the star of the midfield, but the problem was that didn't happen anywhere near frequently enough for him to be viewed as anything but the weakest lead driver among the 2026 lineups. Lawson's new teammate, 18-year-old Arvid Lindblad, is someone Red Bull rates highly, but he faces a very steep learning curve as the only 2026 rookie. He's spent just 3 full years on the junior ladder before stepping up to F1, including a patchy rookie Formula 2 season, but leaves plenty of question marks over how raw a talent he is. Lindblad has huge potential, and Lawson did bounce back strongly from his disastrous 2-race Red Bull racing stint, so it's a solid lineup, but it's the worst of a really solid bunch. 10th, Alpine. Pierre Gasly and Franco Colapinto down 1. Pierre Gasly did a heroic job in F1 2025's worst car, scoring all of Alpine's 22 points. But just as was the case 12 months ago, there are doubts about his teammate. Franco Colapinto had a shaky start after replacing Jack Doohan at round 7 of the 2025 season, crashing in Q1 at Imola and struggling so much that Alpine flirted with replacing him for 2026. Colapinto turned things around enough for Alpine to keep him, but he could never match or beat Gasly when the Alpine was a point scorer, only occasionally when it was uncompetitive. Given Alpine is so convinced it can take a big step forward this year, it should be concerned that only one of its drivers might be ready to make the most of it. 9th, Cadillac. Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas, new entry. F1 2026's new team Cadillac has picked 2 drivers with 16 Grand Prix victories between them in Perez and Bottas, arguably 2 of the finest number 2 drivers of the last decade. At their F1 peaks, Perez and Bottas were even able to occasionally beat their legendary F1 teammates Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, but both had limitations and dropped off the grid after 2024. And it's hard to see how either would have returned without Cadillac, which in itself says something about this lineup. But once they shake off any rust, they'll still likely form a very dependable, highly experienced driver lineup that is still the strongest pairing a completely new F1 team has had in the 21st century. 8th, Audi. Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto down 1. We've already seen year 1 of Audi's first F1 driver lineup at Sauber last year, and it was perfectly solid. Nico Hülkenberg continued to be one of the most effective midfield operators, finally shedding his podium curse and recovering well from a surprising qualifying weakness in the first half of the year. But he still went missing on a few too many weekends and lacks the all-round consistency of other top midfield operators like Fernando Alonso or Carlos Sainz. Hülkenberg's teammate Gabriel Bortoleto made a strong start to his rookie year, giving Hülkenberg some unexpectedly tough competition and maturing well as the car became more competitive. But Bortoleto had a shaky second half of the year, failing to build on his solid start, and alongside Hülkenberg's own at times patchy form, that means Audi falls short of a higher ranking. 7th, Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll up 1. No prizes for guessing which Aston Martin driver is holding this lineup back from a higher placing. He might be 44, but there are very few signs for ages catching up with Fernando Alonso, who wasn't error-free in 2025, but was routinely punching above the weight of a disappointing Aston Martin car. He scored 72% of the team's points in his 3 seasons alongside Lance Stroll, who is coming off the back of arguably his weakest season with the team. That season included just 1 points finish in the final 9 weekends, compared to 6 for Alonso. Plus, he outqualified Alonso just once in 30 attempts in 2025, the worst record amongst the full season driver pairings. Aston Martin can only hope the very different 2026 regulations will bring its drivers closer together, especially if Adrian Newey delivers what team owner Lawrence Stroll signed him for. 6th, Haas. Ollie Behrman and Esteban Ocon, no change. At his peak, Ollie Behrman was probably F1 2025's fastest rookie, hauling the Haas to a 4th place finish in Mexico that was probably just as impressive as the podiums achieved by fellow rookies Isaac Hadjar and Kimi Antonelli. He was the second most prolific driver in the midfield after the summer break last year, only behind Carlos Sainz and miles ahead of more experienced teammate Esteban Ocon. Ocon couldn't live with the same rear-end instability that Behrman could, and as the Haas got quicker, the gap between them grew. Ocon ended the year on a high though, with a strong 7th place finish in Abu Dhabi, and did pick up a number of unlikely points finishes from stellar race drives and alternative strategies, which makes this more of a rounded duo than Sauber and Aston Martin. 5th, Ferrari. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, down 4. No team has fallen further in our rankings year on year than Ferrari, and that has very little to do with Charles Leclerc. His superb 2025 saved Ferrari from an even worse season, and he's proved himself more than worthy of having a proper shot at the title. Ferrari's big drop-off is as a result of the first year of Lewis Hamilton's big move being so underwhelming. 0 Grand Prix podiums compared to Leclerc's 7, some truly abysmal weekends, and inconsistency that even left Hamilton calling for himself to be replaced at one stage. The peaks were solid enough, not just the China sprint win, but weekends like Monza or Austin, where Hamilton was only a fraction off Leclerc's pace. The problem was, those could never be strung together consistently enough, so unless the new 2026 cars unlock something that's been missing from Hamilton for the last 2 seasons, it's hard to see how this lineup will last much longer. 4th, Williams. Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, up 1. It took a while for things to start clicking, but once they did, Carlos Sainz and Williams proved to be a highly effective combination last year. Sainz took 2 giant-killing podiums in a stellar second half of 2025, where he outscored the driver Ferrari fired him for, Lewis Hamilton, and got on top of his teammate Alex Albon. Albon is now perhaps the bigger question mark in this driver lineup, but before his late season drop-off, he was one of 2025's strongest performers. If you could combine the Albon we saw in the first half of 2025 with the Sainz from the second half, this lineup would be even higher, but as it is, 4th feels about right for this midfield super team. 3rd, Mercedes. George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, no change. We rated George Russell as the best driver not named Max Verstappen in 2025, as his strongest F1 season yet proved he's more than ready to make the most of championship challenging machinery that Mercedes is yet to supply him with. His teammate Kimi Antonelli might have dragged this lineup down more if it wasn't for the impressive late season turnaround he made last year with podiums in Brazil and Las Vegas. After a really rocky middle, it was those late season weekends that finally backed up why Mercedes rated Antonelli as highly as Verstappen, and all signs point to Antonelli making a further step in 2026. But he's not yet anywhere near close enough to Russell's level week in week out to place Mercedes any higher, as his totally anonymous season-ending Abu Dhabi weekend proved. 2nd, Red Bull. Max Verstappen and Isaac Hadjar, up 2. F1 2025's best driver paired with F1 2025's best rookie is more than enough to lift Red Bull up in our rankings compared to 12 months ago. Hadjar has been more convincing than Lawson or his successor Ayuki Tsunoda ever looked before they went up against Verstappen, with plenty of signs that Hadjar could break the second driver curse at Red Bull. His case is helped by the new 2026 regulations providing something of a reset too, potentially eliminating some of the quirks of the Red Bull that only Verstappen's been able to drive around effectively so far. But we've been here before, lots of hype around the driver being able to cope alongside Verstappen, only for them to crumble and leave Red Bull as a one-driver team. So for now, even though it's difficult to look past Verstappen as F1's current benchmark driver, the lineup he leads is not quite the best duo. First, McLaren. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, up 1. If you had a blank check and control of an F1 team, you'd surely take Verstappen over either of the McLaren drivers. But it's near impossible to look past Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri as F1's strongest pairing. While much was rightly made of McLaren and its drivers making heavy weather of the 2025 F1 title fight, they were still operating at a seriously high level. Both the strides Piastri took to control the championship in the first half of what was only his 3rd season in F1, and the manner in which Norris bounced back in the second half of the campaign to dominate weekends and take the title, speak to the strength of McLaren's pairing. No other team has 2 proven title contenders, and you could argue both drivers will grow in 2026, with Piastri having learnt lessons of his title collapse, and Norris relaxing more, having achieved a title dream, silencing internal and external doubts.